during a routine House Oversight Committee hearing focused on U.S. foreign aid and development spending. The conversation had taken a technical turn. Lawmakers were examining how American tax dollars were being used abroad, a topic that often draws passionate debate from both sides of the aisle. But it wasn't the complex budget numbers or foreign aid policy specifics that sparked headlines that day. It was a single moment, a comment, that shifted the tone of the entire hearing and quickly spiraled into a national conversation. Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative figure known for her boldness and sharp remarks, took her seat at the microphone. With the cameras rolling and her colleagues listening, she leaned forward with practiced poise. Her statement began in line with the committee's theme, questioning spending priorities and highlighting government waste. But soon her tone shifted. We're sending billions of dollars overseas, she said, her voice crisp and unflinching. To countries that still can't get clean drinking water, countries that don't even have the most basic public health systems. I'm talking about places that, quite frankly, treat sanitation like a foreign concept, especially in parts of Africa. The words hung in the air. Though she continued her speech, the focus was already lost. Her remarks had landed like a thud, not just because of their bluntness, but because of their sweeping generalizations. No specifics. No distinction between nations or programs. Just Africa, a vast, complex, and diverse continent, reduced to a punchline about poor plumbing. The statement didn't seem to shock Leavitt. In fact, she seemed pleased with the reaction it drew from a few nods on her side of the room. The framing of her remark was intentional, folded into a larger argument about what she saw as government irresponsibility in foreign spending. But for many in the room, and later across the country, it wasn't just policy criticism. It came off as careless, dismissive, and tone-deaf. What made the comment even more striking was the context. Africa wasn't under discussion at the time. The committee had been reviewing broader USA performance metrics, covering everything from Latin America to parts of Southeast Asia. Leavitt had introduced Africa unprompted, singling it out as an example of what she viewed as failure. There was no acknowledgement of the political complexities of aid, no mention of the numerous US-backed programs across African nations that had delivered life-saving medicine, supported entrepreneurship, and even strengthened democratic institutions. The continent had simply become a rhetorical device, an example of dysfunction, used to score a point. For some lawmakers and observers, this wasn't just poor phrasing. It echoed a pattern, a way some American politicians speak about African nations as if they're hopeless, corrupt, and perpetually needy. That type of language wasn't just offensive to people from or connected to the continent. It also ignored the nuance and reality of what's happening there. Africa isn't a country, it's 54 countries. Some struggling, yes, but many thriving, growing, and leading on issues like mobile banking, green energy, and civil society innovation. There was a noticeable shift in the room after Leavitt's comments. A few colleagues glanced across the aisle. One aide shook their head. And while Leavitt didn't seem to notice the discomfort around her, others certainly did. The media in attendance took note too, though the hearing was lengthy and filled with dense testimony from experts. Her words stood out immediately. Clips began circulating even before the session concluded. Some conservative pundits applauded her candor, claiming she said what others were too afraid to, but many, including scholars, aid workers, and even fellow lawmakers, pushed back, calling the statement reductive, ignorant, and lacking any policy value. In the days that followed, African American leaders, diaspora communities, and international partners began weighing in. Ambassadors and civil rights organizations issued statements. One editorial called it a cheap shot from the comfort of privilege. Another described it as an insult disguised as critique. What Leavitt may have intended as a commentary on fiscal discipline ended up becoming something much more charged. It reignited a debate about how American politicians, especially those in leadership, discuss the rest of the world, and what kind of worldview they project when they do so. And though she did not walk back her remarks or clarify her intent, the impact had already been felt, far beyond Capitol Hill. When Jasmine Crockett finally took the microphone later in the hearing, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had started as a standard discussion about U.S. foreign aid had taken a subtle but unmistakable turn after Karoline Leavitt's earlier comments. Crockett had been present during that moment, sitting across from Leavitt, her expression composed, but with a visible edge in her eyes. She didn't react immediately, and she didn't interrupt. She simply took a pen, made a quick note, and waited for her turn. But those who knew her could sense that something was coming. Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas, is not someone easily rattled. With a background in criminal defense law and grassroots activism, she is no stranger to confrontation, but she's also deliberate. She knows when to strike and how to use her words with maximum precision. So when she began speaking, it wasn't with volume but with intent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began calmly. We're here to talk about the impact and accountability of U.S. foreign aid. That's an important conversation. but I feel the need to respond to something said earlier because silence, in some cases, feels like complicity. Asterisk. Her gaze turned slowly toward Karoline Leavitt, who sat a few chairs down, leafing through papers. Crockett's tone remained respectful, but there was steel in her words. Asterisk. It's easy to mock places you've never been to, easy to make sweeping generalizations from the safety of this room. But if you've never walked the streets of Nairobi or seen young girls in Ghana studying by candlelight because their families pooled resources to buy one textbook, maybe hold the judgment. Asterisk. There was a pause. You could hear the clicks of keyboards in the press section, but nothing else. Asterisk. I've worked in international legal advocacy, Crockett continued. And during that work I visited parts of Africa. Yes, Africa, the continent some of us seem to think is a punchline. I saw doctors performing surgeries in clinics built with the help of American aid. I saw women launching small businesses in markets with interest-free microloans supported by US programs. These weren't failures, these were success stories. Leavitt didn't respond, but her posture stiffened. But what struck me most wasn't the poverty, it was the determination, Crockett added. You think clean water is a punchline? Try telling that to the little girl who walks 5 miles every morning with a jug on her head so her family can drink and cook. That's not something to mock, that's something to admire. Asterisk. The power in Crockett's voice wasn't in the volume, it was in the restraint. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't ranting. She was offering a mirror, showing exactly what Leavitt's words had overlooked. And then came the sentence that would echo far beyond the hearing. It takes a lot of privilege to criticize the poor for being poor while sitting in a taxpayer chair, drinking taxpayer-funded water, and reading from a script that cost someone else their dignity. Asterisk. There was a subtle gasp from someone near the back of the chamber. A few lawmakers lowered their eyes. And even Leavitt, often defiant, avoided direct eye contact in that moment. Asterisk. Crockett didn't stop to gloat. She didn't throw in a slogan or a soundbite. Instead, she pivoted right back to the hearing's purpose, breaking down how foreign aid, when done right, stabilizes regions, strengthens US partnerships, and saves lives. Asterisk. But her earlier words had already done something deeper. They had reframed the discussion. Where Leavitt had reduced Africa to dysfunction, Crockett restored its humanity. She didn't romanticize the continent, but she respected it. She pointed out the hypocrisy of looking down on communities that had been disadvantaged not just by their geography or governments, but often by the very global systems America had helped create. Asterisk. And that's why her words struck so hard. Asterisk. This wasn't just about defending foreign aid, it was about defending people. People who rarely get the chance to speak in front of Congress. People who don't have a seat at the table. Crockett used her seat to speak for them, and in doing so, reminded the room and everyone watching that leadership is about more than clever lines. It's about knowing when to listen, when to speak, and who you're speaking for. Asterisk. By the time the hearing had ended, it wasn't policy recommendations or budget proposals that people were talking about. It was the sharp, precise moment when Jasmine Crockett challenged Karoline Leavitt's offhanded remark about Africa. What might have passed unnoticed in a standard committee session quickly became the focal point of a viral wave that swept across social media platforms. Clips of the exchange circulated at lightning speed, and what started as a tense exchange in a Capitol Hill hearing room exploded into a national and even international conversation. Asterisk. The first viral clip was only 47 seconds long. It showed Crockett calm and focused, delivering her powerful statement. It takes a lot of privilege to criticize the poor for being poor while sitting in a taxpayer-funded chair, drinking taxpayer-funded water, and reading from a script that to cost someone else their dignity. The internet took that line and ran with it. It was reposted, quoted, and stitched into reaction videos across TikTok and Instagram. Within an hour, the hashtag Crockett clapback began trending on X, formerly Twitter, followed by hashtag Africa is not a joke and hashtag privilege on display. Asterisk. While Karoline Leavitt may have thought her original remark was a minor, even routine criticism of foreign spending, the public didn't see it that way. Her sweeping comments about Africa suggesting it was a continent incapable of basic sanitation were interpreted as deeply dismissive and culturally ignorant. And when Crockett responded with lived experience, international context, and quiet strength, it struck a chord with people far beyond political circles. Asterisk. What made Crockett's response so resonant wasn't just her tone, though it was undoubtedly composed and deliberate, but the way she positioned herself. She didn't posture or grandstand. She didn't call names. Instead, she spoke with the moral weight of someone who had seen firsthand what was being so casually mocked. That authenticity translated across screens. Viewers from both liberal and conservative backgrounds commented on the dignity and restraint of her reply, even if they didn't agree with her politics. Many agreed on one point. She had completely neutralized Leavitt's comment without ever raising her voice. Asterisk. Even prominent media figures took notice. Political analysts on major networks began dissecting the exchange. One clip played in full on MSNBC's evening segment, where a panelist remarked, This wasn't just a clapback, it was a clinic in how to respond to ignorance with facts and grace. Meanwhile, an unexpected moment of bipartisan agreement emerged on a conservative talk show, where a host admitted, "I may not agree with Representative Crockett on a lot of issues, but she handled that beautifully." Sometimes, silence speaks louder than shouting, and Leavitt had nothing to say after that. Karoline Leavitt, who had previously built a reputation on being quick to fire back on social media, suddenly went quiet. Her official channels didn't post clips of the hearing, no clarifying statement was issued, no effort was made to walk back or double down on her comment. Her office declined interviews, and to many observers, that silence said everything. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's profile rose dramatically. She appeared on morning news programs the next day, where anchors asked her to elaborate on what prompted her to speak up. Her answers remained consistent. It's not about political points. It's about dignity. We need to remember that when we talk about countries, especially ones impacted by centuries of colonialism and exploitation, we're talking about real people, not abstractions. But perhaps the most striking responses came from beyond U.S. borders. A popular journalist from Nigeria tweeted, "Watching a U.S. lawmaker defend African dignity like that, it was something we're not used to seeing. Usually we're reduced to either pity or ridicule." That sentiment was echoed across African media outlets, some of which praised Crockett for addressing the type of patronizing language often heard from Western politicians in community centers and diaspora spaces across America. Crockett's words were replayed and discussed. For immigrants from African nations, the moment felt personal. For many, it was rare to see someone in power call out the kind of careless commentary that often goes unchallenged. Crockett hadn't just defended a policy, she had defended people's worth. In a political landscape often dominated by shouting matches and social media theatrics, Jasmine Crockett's response offered a contrast. Her calm, clear words reverberated in ways Karoline Leavitt likely never expected. While Leavitt's comment had been meant to draw attention to what she considered misguided foreign aid, the attention ended up focused entirely on her misunderstanding of what that aid truly represents and, more importantly, who it serves. In the days following the explosive committee hearing, it became clear that Karoline Leavitt's comment had triggered more than just a momentary backlash. It had reignited a deeper conversation about how some lawmakers frame foreign aid, especially aid directed to African nations, and as the headlines continued to swirl, many began to question the broader implications of Leavitt's worldview, not just in terms of political rhetoric, but in the way it reflected an unsettling pattern among some rising political voices on the right. Karoline Leavitt, who had been making a name for herself with sharp commentary and combative soundbites, had built her image around unfiltered conservatism. To her base, this authenticity was her strength. But this time, it backfired. Her statement about Africa, casually mocking entire nations as if they were interchangeable, pulled back the curtain on a mindset that critics argued was rooted less in fiscal concern and more in a dismissive, outdated view of the world. This wasn't the first time a politician had spoken broadly and critically about foreign aid, but Leavitt's remarks carried a different weight because they weren't grounded in numbers or policy disputes. They were framed as moral judgments. The problem wasn't just what she said, but how icily she said it. No context, no data, no nuance, just a sweeping statement that reduced a continent of over 1 billion people to a cliché. Jasmine Crockett's pointed rebuttal hadn't just made Leavitt look unprepared, it revealed the vulnerability in Leavitt's political approach. Crockett didn't just defend African nations. She highlighted the importance of leadership that sees people, not just votes or dollar signs. Her words made it clear that to truly serve in Congress, one must understand that words have reach, and that policies don't exist in a vacuum. Foreign aid is not a theoretical game. It touches lives, shapes health outcomes, builds infrastructure, and in many cases, represents America's values on a global stage. Leavitt's failure to respond meaningfully after Crockett's remarks, that spoke volumes. She had a moment to clarify, to contextualize, or even just to acknowledge the blowback. But instead, she remained silent. That silence only magnified the perception that her comment wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a reflection of how she truly views the outside world. And for many observers, that was the most troubling part. Public reaction turned more critical as analysts began dissecting Leavitt's broader political record. Commentators noted that while she had frequently criticized federal spending and globalist priorities, there had been a pattern in her rhetoric, one that often painted the rest of the world as either a threat or a burden. The Africa comment didn't exist in isolation. It was simply the clearest example yet of what many critics had long suspected, that Leavitt's ideology was built less on conservatism and more on cultural superiority. Crockett, for her part, avoided turning the moment into a personal feud. When asked by reporters whether Leavitt should apologize, she responded thoughtfully, "This isn't about an apology to me. It's about reflection. If she believes what she said, then she should stand by it and explain it. But if she realizes it was wrong, then she should take responsibility. That's what leaders do." Asterisk yet Leavitt offered no such reflection. Her social media feeds returned to regular programming, talking points about border security, inflation, and radical Democrats. No mention of the hearing, no sign of introspection. And that's where the long-term damage began to show. Asterisk behind the scenes, even some Republicans voiced frustration. One senior aide to a GOP lawmaker privately noted, "You can make a strong case against certain aid packages. We do it all the time. But there's a way to do it that doesn't make us look ignorant or callous." That wasn't it. Others feared that Leavitt's moment had undermined legitimate conservative arguments about aid oversight by packaging them in condescension. Asterisk. The contrast between Leavitt and Crockett became symbolic. On one side, a lawmaker who saw the rest of the world as a burden. On the other, a lawmaker who had been there, seen the challenges, and still believed in the power of empathy. The divide wasn't just ideological, it was generational, cultural, and moral. Asterisk Leavitt's image as a bold truth-teller had taken a hit. She may have energized her core supporters, but she also revealed the limits of a political strategy that prizes provocation over substance. In the process, Jasmine Crockett's .com rebuke did more than just counter a statement, it exposed the hollowness behind it. Asterisk, the moment between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett may have started as a routine disagreement during a congressional hearing, but it quickly evolved into something far more telling. What unfolded was not just a clash of political ideologies, but a sharp contrast in how two lawmakers approach leadership, responsibility, and the power of words. Asterisk in one corner stood Leavitt, a rising conservative figure known for her firebrand style and unapologetic rhetoric. Her remark about Africa, delivered with little context or thought, may have been intended as a jab at foreign aid spending, but it ended up sounding like a dismissal of the lives and struggles of millions. It wasn't about debating numbers or policy strategy. It was about perception, respect, and basic understanding, all of which seemed to be absent in that moment. Asterisk in the other corner stood Jasmine Crockett, who didn't respond with rage or insults. She responded with perspective. Her quiet but commanding words reframed the discussion around humanity, dignity, and the purpose of governance. She reminded the room, and the nation watching, that public service isn't about who can throw the sharpest jab. It's about who can speak up when dignity is on the line, and who can recognize the difference between criticism and condescension. Asterisk, the aftermath of their exchange reflected that difference. Crockett's remarks sparked a sense of pride among many, especially African and African-American communities, who saw her as defending something that often goes undefended. The humanity of people often reduced to statistics or stereotypes. Leavitt, on the other hand, found herself largely silent, as her comment became a symbol of a mindset many felt needed to be challenged. Asterisk. In a time when politics is often dominated by sound bites and social media algorithms, the Crockett-Leavitt moment served as a reminder that substance still matters, that empathy still matters, that when people in power speak, those words ripple out far beyond the walls of Congress, and they can either uplift or diminish. Asterisk, whether Karoline Leavitt learns from the experience remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. Her words sparked a reckoning she hadn't anticipated. And Jasmine Crockett's response didn't just quiet a room, it stirred a conversation. Asterisk moments like this won't disappear in a day. They linger, they teach, and they reveal who's really listening and who's just performing. In the end, this wasn't just about foreign aid or political points, it was about values. And in that moment it was clear